Good morning, everybody. Hope you are doing well. Okay, so what is the last class we have just discussed? We'll reiterate that, then we can start with our today's session. In the last class, we are discussing about the various things about your spring. So we'll discuss about that, and then we can start with a few portions which is left out. Very good morning, Silpa and Pallavi. Fine. So let us see that, okay, what in the last class we have just discussed. Okay, if you see that, okay, in spring schedule, like as part of your spring, so we have overview of the spring which we have been finished, where we have discussed about the features about the spring and the architecture about the spring also what we have been discussed. That is chapter 1, okay, of overview of the spring that we have finished. Then we have started implementing the dependency injection services, okay, and where we have discussed about what is the dependency injection services all about, and where we have also discussed about how the application objects are dependent. Okay, then we have also discussed about the different kind of your dependency injection like auto wire and explicit, okay, wiring, how we are doing. So that and again in the case of your explicit wiring, we are talking about the setter methods and using your constructors, how we can implement. In the case of your auto wiring, how we can do that, okay, with using the data. So that are the few things what we have been defined in the case of the dependency injection services is all about. And then we started implementing your integrating the spring with the web layer. If I want to implement, how do I implement that? So in that, okay, we have also seen the different phases where we have discussed about the life cycle, how the spring with the web layer it is going to be integrated, that we have been discussed. So that is about your integrating spring with your web layer also. That's the part we have been discussed, where we have discussed about the dispatcher servlet is the first point controller type which is going to work in a spring, and then it will try to access the data from your application context.xml file, and it will take the data, okay, it will integrate the data, and it will try to get the data from the dispatcher servlet.xml file and get the URL mapping and get the controller, appropriate controller for that, okay. And once we'll get the appropriate controller, then the controller will give you the view, okay, and the view resolver, it is going to resolve the view name, and the view it will be rendered to us. So this is the phases whatever we have seen that we have been discussed in the integrating the spring with a web layer. In the third chapter we have been discussed about that. And in the fourth chapter we have been discussed again the same, that is implementing your AOP, where we have discussed about how AOP it is going to be implemented. There we have seen some of the few terminologies like advice, then we have point cut, and we have discussed about the proxy object, how we are implementing. With a sample demo of that, okay, we have been discussed how AOP is going to be implemented in the spring-based application when you are implementing. How do I implement that? That's the few things what we have been discussed with the implementing of your AOP is all about. Then, okay, started discussing about your chapter 5, that is nothing but your integrating spring with the business and the presentation layers, how we have implemented that we have been discussing. In the chapter 5, integrating spring with the business and the presentation layer. How have we implemented that? Okay, that is here we are talking about the integrating your spring with the Jsfs, integrating your spring with your Hibernate. If I want to implement, how do I implement that? That we are discussing with your chapter 5. So in that chapter 5, we have discussed about how the Jsfs can be integrated with the spring application. Okay, that is we have been discussed. Now today we are going to discuss about how, okay, we can implement the spring, how it can integrate with your Hibernate application also. That's a few concepts what we have, okay, that we are going to discuss. Then we'll start with the chapter 6, that is nothing but your managing the transactions, implementations if you want to do. How do I do that? That's the few things what we are going to discuss. Alright, so this is the overall things about what we have been discussed in a spring. Okay, we have implemented that we have been discussed. Now we'll move down to the next part. Okay, that is today we are going to discuss about how we can implement the Hibernate implementation. Okay, with the Spring, if I want to do, how do I do that? How I can implement that? Okay, that's a few points what we are going to discuss for today's class. Fine. Let me start with that. So we'll see that, okay, how we can integrate Spring with the Hibernate also. Okay, we are going to see about that, because already we have seen how we have integrated the Jsfs implementation, how we can do that we have been already discussed. We are just going to discuss about how we can integrate the Spring with Hibernate. That we are going to discuss now. Let me start with that concept. So integrating Spring with a Hibernate, this is a database layer how we can implement, which will communicate with the database. So the database layer, as you know that, okay, it is purely Hibernate is a database layer which will communicate with the relational databases and different kind of your relational databases which we can use here. And this provides the data persistence. Okay, so please remember it is providing the data persistence. To access the data from a database, you need to implement a tool such as Hibernate, okay, and between the database layer and the business layer of your application. And Hibernate is a powerful object relational mapping tool. Okay, please see to this, it is very, very useful, okay, information. It is a powerful object relational mapping tool and lies between the database layer and the business layer. Because, okay, this is the layer, okay, where you can get the data from the business layer and you can send that particular data or retrieve the data from the business database layer and you can send it to the business. So this is what your ORM tool which will do, and the application to access the data from any database, and it will provide the data persistence, saving the data into the database. There are the few things what your Hibernate does. Hibernate, when you are implementing, you need not to implement the JDBC, because JDBC is manually, you need to write a lot of code into that, okay, hence we are not using that. Hibernate has the limitation, okay, that is the application accessing the database has to be depend on the Hibernate API like configuration, session factory and session. As you know that, okay, there are 6 different objects which are available in case of your Hibernate. That is nothing but your configuration, session factory and the session. These are the 3 different kind of your objects which are there. And again we have something called as transaction, query and criteria are the 3 other objects which we generally have in the application. These are the few things which we are, okay, dealing with your Hibernate is all about. Now these objects are scattered throughout the code across the application and have to be handled manually. The limitation can be removed by integrating Hibernate with the Spring framework. So these objects are separately, we are writing configuration, session factory, session object we need to create and then we need to implement. And the configuration where we are going to write the code for, okay, accessing the database and everything. But however, okay, when you are implementing, okay, so with you are using the Spring framework, we can make that, okay, instead of writing the scattered code in the objects, we can write that, okay, in a better manner, okay, when we are using the Spring framework is all about. So that's a few things what we are going to discuss today. In a Spring framework, okay, when we talk about the Spring framework, is placed between the application classes and the ORM tool. And this will take care of all the Hibernate transactions and all that will take care by the Spring framework. This will enable you to use its features such as the dependency injection services, AOP, and to configure the objects, okay, in your application. So that time we are going to use the Spring framework is all about. We can use the dependency injection services where we can implement the loose coupling. AOP we can implement, okay, where we can go for your cross-cutting concerns, okay, can be modularized. That is what your AOP will do. And integration of your Hibernate with a Spring help you to write or use the Hibernate object as a Spring Bean component we can use. So that, okay, what will happen? Now a Spring Bean can access the data from the database and we can use it also. That kind of things which we can do when you are integrating your Spring with your Hibernate also. So this is a sample diagram which shows that your business layer Spring, it is that you have Hibernate, and in Hibernate we have the different things like transaction management, resource management, ORM mapping, DO objects which are available. We are integrating with your business layer where you have bean management, declarative transaction management, it is there, where service beans are available, which does the model work, that is business applications, executions and all. That is we can do through the service beans also. Business objects are there which are executing the business logic, and we can do the Hibernate integrations also. So these are the layers which we can talk about as part of your Spring with your Hibernate it is concerned. Okay, when you are trying to implement Spring with Hibernate, so these are the few things which we can see. Now let us will move down to that. Okay, now how we can go for this kind of your Hibernate with Spring implementation. If I want to do, how do I do that? Let us will see this. So when you are talking about integrating that, okay, so when we are talking about the Hibernate, as you know that, okay, Hibernate is a purely ORM tool which we are using, which is trying to implement the relational database code with the data with your object orientation program, which can be map, and they can directly store an object as a row in the database. So the relational database represents the data in a tabular format. Okay, then data of the object-oriented application is encapsulated in a class. You can access a class by using objects. To access the tabular data, you need to use a query language. That is what your SQL we are using for accessing the data. It is not possible to directly store the objects in a relational database. So difference between an object-oriented and relational data is called your impedance mismatch also. These are all the few things about the ORM itself. Okay, to remove that impedance, that problem, and implementing the proper mapping, that will be called as a process of ORM. So these are all, and the tools like JDO, Hibernate, IBATIS are helping us, the developer, to map the Java classes to the relational databases. Now, features of the Hibernate also we have seen: object relational, support basic object-oriented principle, inheritance, polymorphism, composition also will be supported. It provides the developer for the transfer persistence level. It will give you the SQL as a language. It is on top of your SQL language. Okay, similarly, we can use that SQL language and we can fetch the data. It will support the query cache by which we can provide the performance with the query when you are doing. It will support also the NetBeans and the Eclipse type of your IDE also supported. And the mapping and everything, it has been written in an XML based file. All that are the few things what we have been discussed as part of your Hibernate. Now, when you are implementing in case of your Hibernate, we know that we have to go for creating a configure class, session factory. Then we need to create a session. Then, using the session object, we can store the data. This is what we are implementing in this. Now, when this is what we have implemented in the ORM, as part of the ORM, we have been discussed about that, and how to implement that we have seen. Now, as part of your integration, it is concerned, how we can use the, we'll see that. So to configure the session factory object in Spring, so when you are using the session factory, because your configuration and all we are going to create, so when you are going to use that session factory object in a Spring, when we use the standalone ORM framework, you have to configure the resource factory which is API. When you are using the Hibernate, build a session factory object from the native Hibernate API. Spring will help you to create a session factory by providing several factory beans in the Spring container it has available, by which we can create session factory object also. And this session factory can be shared among the multiple beans also with the help of the dependency injection services. And session factory can be integrated with other Spring facilities such as data sources with the transaction managers also. And how we have to configure the session factory object in a Spring, you can see. You have to create a Spring configuration file and declare the session factory by using org.springframework.orm.hibernate.local session factory bean class. So this is the bean factory class in your Spring, which is helping us to create a sample Spring actually. And this will provide the path of the Hibernate configuration file as the value of the configuration property while declaring the session factory itself. So this is the file where it will contain the value which will give the information about the configuration file of the Hibernate by which we can get the information of that. You can see also this, this is about your bean ID my session factory org.springframework.orm hibernate 3 local session factory. And here you could see that property name which we have specified, that is hibernate.config.xml file which we need to be specified, that is your config location is the tag, the name, the property name which you can be specified, where you have to specify the Hibernate configuration file which is going to be used by your Hibernate. And the Spring, in the Spring implementation, we need to write this particular code. So that is what we have to do as part of your Hibernate implementation code. We need to do that actually. Now DAO, which is a design pattern that will enable you to communicate with the database layer, which will help separating the persistent code, maintain the application code, enables you to change the ORM tool. So you can create a DAO, and this DAO will contain the code, that is configuration related information, how to create a transaction session factory object, creating a transaction object, creating a session object, and then we can retrieve the data or persist the data. If you want to do, you can implement also. And whenever we are using, so we need to declare this particular DAO. So we can create a DAO class, and this DAO class will help us to do all the operations which need to be done by the Hibernate. All that particular one can be done through the DAO class itself. So bean ID course details DAO class is this, property name session factory, reference is my session factory is the one. This my session factory is the session factory which will be created here. We'll create the session factory object, and then we are going to specify that actually. So that is a simple one which we can be implemented. So using this we can create a sample DAO object, and using that DAO object we can implement the Hibernate coding. And then once you have created the DAO object, then from your JSP file you can call the bean, because the DAO will work as a simple bean type. So you can create an application context file, and from the Spring Hibernate, that is, or maybe that is your, in our case, application context.xml file will contain. And then you can call course detail object and call the course object, and we can display the values also. This is the kind of things which we can be implemented as part of your the Spring based application, which is integrating with your Hibernate, how we have done that it is doing. So let us see a sample example of how that it is being implemented. That is a sample example of code which I want to show you. Let us see that. Let's see, we'll check that. the sample code we are talking about. Okay, so what I need to do is, okay, I have created a Spring and Hibernate application which I am integrating here. So if you see the library files of that, okay, the library files which will contain the Spring Framework jar file, as well if you see that, okay, Hibernate, okay, jar files also it is containing. So both the frameworks have been added to this Spring Framework. This particular project when I have created both the files which has been integrated. One is that, okay, we have created also, we have added the Hibernate framework as well as Spring Framework also it has been added. Now in this case, okay, if you see, we have, there are certain files which we can see, that is nothing but, we have something called as, okay, employee hdm.xml file, which is we are using for, okay, implementing the Hibernate mapping file which is required for us, okay, that we have created. Hibernate configuration file which is there, okay, this is basically for implementing the Hibernate configuration file which will contain the information about the connecting your application to the databases, that is what it will contain, as well as it is containing the mapping file where the employee table, okay, employee class object which is going to map with your employee table. And this is the mapping file which is there, simple mapping file. We have created a class and ID and the property name and the salary which we have created. So we are implementing this thing. So this is a sample example which I am talking about as part of your Hibernate with integrating with your Spring framework it is concerned. And as a part of the Spring also we have, okay, having application context.xml, dispatcher-servlet.xml file it is containing, and redirect.jsp page also it is containing, and index.jsp page is also there. So these are all the pages, okay, the files which are being available, and how we are using, okay, how we are integrating, let us will see that. So as part of your ORM, okay, Hibernate it is concerned, so we have Hibernate configuration file, we have, okay, something called as the Hibernate mapping file also it is containing. And as part of your Spring it is concerned, application context file also it is containing, which is containing about your myDO object, which is a bean object, and a session factory which is containing the session factory information and all, and which is talks about the Hibernate configuration .xml file, and mapping resources, that is a employee.htm.xml file. These are all the information what it will be contained by the bean, and a bean object which we are creating called as myDO. So the DO object, and this DO object which will contain the information or retrieving code or from that particular database and all. So this is what a application context.xml file, which is the part of the Spring based framework when you are creating Spring based application. When you are creating that time we need to use this particular code, okay, as part of your application context.xml file. Coming back to the dispatcher servlet.xml file, in this case what will happen is we have a bean ID which we can see. This is a controller URL mapping which we can create, and you can see that, okay, there is an index controller we have, there is a view resolver it is there. The same code, okay, whatever the default code which will come with your NetBeans, okay, that which is containing about here in the dispatcher servlet.xml file will contain that particular code. Now this is all about your few things about your Spring. In the Spring also, we in the web.xml file you can see that, okay, the file it will be started with a redirect.jsp page, and the servlet which will be loaded, that is dispatcher servlet, and dispatcher servlet which will make a call the dispatcher servlet of org.springframework.web.servlet.dispatcher servlet, and some of the context param values which will be there, that is application context.xml file which will be loaded for this dispatcher servlet, as well as the listener which is going to run, that is context loader listener which is going to be run. So this is my web.xml file which is concerned. So these are all the certain files which are available as a part of your when we are implementing your Hibernate with the Spring based application. When we are implementing, this is what we can do. Is it clear now till now?
Hello? Can you hear
Yes,
me, sir?
yes,
Hello?
yes, Lakshmi, I'm not getting your video.
Hello, sir. One
Yeah,
second.
tell me.
Yes, sir. Sir, is this the first class of Jsfhs?
I did not get you.
Sir, is this the first class of this training session, sir?
Fine, fine. Okay, so let us see this. Okay, this is the file which we have created. Then we have something called as DO. Okay, DO file which we need to be created as we have seen. Okay, for implementing this. In DO class, what it will be containing, let us will see that. DO package. My DO, okay, which is containing the simple code that is session factory. So remember one point here. Whatever you have specified the session factory in your application context.xml file, okay, the bean ID names of this thing. You could see that. And here I have created a table method called as get table data, which will call the create query called as employee. From employee, then which will get the list data, and this list data which will be returned. Okay, whoever will call this particular method, he will get that particular list of objects, that is which will be getting from the employee table. And get session factory, set session factory are the methods which we are given for initializing that particular session factory objects and all. That is a sample example which we have created as part of your DO class which we are talking about. Now let us will go for the next part, that is nothing but your employee class, which is an entity based class. And I have employee ID, salary, and employee name is the class. We have get employee ID, set employee ID, get a salary, set salary, get employee name, and set employee name are some of the setter and getter methods which are being available for this ID for these attributes which are the part of your employee class itself. Because it is containing the business logic or anything it will contain, so hence we have created in a package called as a model. So that is what. So DO is a model, employee is a model. Okay, then in that we are keeping the relevant classes and interfaces. If it is required, we can keep that particular relevant classes and implementing the interfaces and all. So that is all about your a sample implementation about the code of the DO which you are creating. And coming back to the redirect.jsp page, which is containing the code, okay, where I have written the application context file. Yes. So application context file which we have created, file system XML application, and here I have created. This is what we are implementing, application context file. So here, because I have created it in Hibernate Spring file, I can use this differently. We are going to implement this. So this is about your application context file which will be gets created. You can specify that. Web file application context.xml file which will be loaded. So in the redirect.jsp page, I have created a my DO object, which is this DO object, and we can get the context bean and the name of this bean. It is my DO. If you remember that, okay, in your application context.xml file, where I've written that, okay, bean object is my DO is the name which I specified. The same name I have to be specified here also, my DO. Then DO dot my DO dot class, which we need to be specified because we have created in that DO package my DO class which is available. And then obj dot get table data, which is a method by which we can get the list of objects, and then using the iterator we can print that list and which will be displayed the values of that particular employees. That are the basic part, okay, which we are doing as part of integrating your Hibernate with your Spring. If I want to integrate, we can integrate this. Alright, any questions here? Any questions? So this is about your how to integrate a Hibernate information with a Spring based application. If I want to execute, then how do I do that? So that are the part which I have given. Okay, so we need to create, in this case, okay, please remember, I need to create an application by using the Hibernate framework as well as Spring framework. I need to create a bean, okay, type which is my DO, okay, which is will work as a bean type, and model which will be working as an model component, that is business logic component. And then, okay, we need to write the code. Okay, automatically you'll have something called as Hibernate configuration file, as well as, okay, employee Hibernate. Your mapping file need to also be created for you. Application context file, which will contain two things. One is bean, okay, which is bean ID, which is your actual bean, where your code you have written for accessing the data. So that is what one bean it will be there. And how to write a bean in your application context: bean ID, name of the bean, and the class where the bean class exactly exists, that you need to be specified. Second bean, which is nothing but, okay, where you are specifying the session factory object, and this we can specify the session factory object. It is in the Hibernate configuration.xml file which is there, and the mapping resources is nothing but your employee.hdm.xml file. That is what it will be containing here. So this is the two type of your bean need to be created as part of your application context.xml file which will be containing here. Any other questions? So this is way how you should run an Hibernate file, Hibernate with a Spring based file. If you want to run, we can run that. Can you please all of you write your again the name and email ID and your mobile number, because some of you might have been added in between, so that okay we can extract that data also. In a single one you have to write one line only, your name, mobile number and your email ID. Yeah,
Hello.
please tell.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm not getting your web camera.
I think it is a problem over here, sir, with cam. There is a problem with camera, I think.
Who is that?
Sir? Hello?
Your name, what is this? Kaushik. Who is attending?
Kaushik. sir. Sir, my complete name is there, sir. I think it is only showing half of my name over there. It's Lakshman Anand Kaushik over there.
Lakshmi, can you come here? Give me a moment. Okay, fine. I got from Arun, Pallavi, Suman, I got it. Okay, from Jayanagar, fine. Kormangla also I got it. Those who are using the guest ID of Jayanagar but actually not the center of Jayanagar or Kormangla, they need to write their center name also, because I will be confused with the center name. If you are really using the center ID, then you can, not a problem. Like from Chandigarh, Pallavi and Suman, I need not have a problem because they are. But I think Shivani, then I think Pavitra, Silpa, can you please write your center name also? Others, I am not getting from others. From Janakpuri, from Model Town, Rajouri Garden. From Ranchi, I have not got. From Ranchi, Salt Lake, Mysore, VV Mola Road. Okay then. Fine. So this is a few things what we have discussed as part of your Hibernate and Spring implementations that we have been discussed. Now the next which we are going to discuss is very important session. That is what we are going to see. That is how we can go for the transactions. Okay, so how to implement the transaction in our application, that we are going to discuss. Let us will see that. A very important one, that is what is the transaction is all about and how to implement the transaction. That is the 6th chapter of your Spring based application, how to use, that we are going to discuss also. So that is transaction in case of your Spring also. As you know that already we have implemented the transaction as part of your Hibernate, we have been discussed. And we have seen that basically we are implementing the transaction to implement the Jsfhs properties. So Jsfhs property it has to take, that is atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. These are the 4 features which any transaction it has to keep. That is why we are implementing the transaction. And anytime when you are working with your database, okay, transaction is very, very important concerns as part of your application. It is just multiple transactions, okay, over on a particular database with this particular application, or maybe concurrently if multiple transactions are working from these applications. Okay, then there can be a chances of inconsistency of the data or maybe failure of data it is there. So that's why we should implement the transactions based on that. Now as a part of that, okay, so in case of your Spring, we are also implementing the transactions. And how do we implement the transaction in our Spring? Okay, that we are going to discuss now. So there is a payment process which may be there, okay, in a reservation system. So that can be multiple values. Okay, what will happen? Like we have, it can be credit card, it can be debit card. Okay, if that credit card, then it has to check the Visa. Okay, whether the credit card number it is checking or not, correct or not, and then it has to check the balances also. All that other things, okay, which you need to be checked with your reservation system. Now, when you are doing this type of your concurrently, when multiple transactions are happening with a single transaction, so there has to be a proper transaction. It has to be implemented. And as we know that, okay, transaction is considered as a single logical unit of work that either completely succeeds or produces no result at all. So that is called your transaction. So either all the operations will be succeeded or none of them, okay, will be succeeded. That is the part, okay, which you want to be implemented as this. A transaction groups an arbitrary number of simple operations. Okay, the whole process appears as a single logical unit of work. If any operation fails to complete during the execution of the transaction will be get aborted. Okay, so this is, and transaction should possess the acid properties. That means, okay, it has to implement the acid, okay, property in our application. That is, that should be data should be consistent and permanent after your transaction completes. And that we know that, okay, your acid properties and each of the acronym and all, and what is its case, atomicity or consistency, isolation or durability. Now, as a part of your implementing the transaction cases, if you are implementing in case of your Spring-based applications or anywhere, the transaction attributes which you need to be specified here. So, transaction attribute which is describe how the transaction policies should be applied to the methods that implement the transactions that we are going to discuss in a case of your Spring-based application. So a transaction has the following attributes like propagation behavior, we have isolation levels, we have read-only, we have transaction timeout, and we have rollback rules. All these are the different type of your attributes which we can be specified as part of your transaction. So when you are implementing the transaction in case of your Spring-based application, so we need to use, okay, these are the some of the certain attributes which we can take depending on the type of isolation level or read-only or transaction timeout and rollback and propagation behavior. It need to be specified, okay, when you are executing any particular methods and all. So let us see that, okay, what are the transactional attributes which are there and how we can implement. First attribute which we can talk about, that is nothing but your propagation behavior is the first one which we can set. So what is the propagation behavior is all about? Let us will see about that. See that. Okay, propagation behavior, which will see that, okay, the definition, what is does actually. Controls, okay, the scope of the transaction. Okay, if you want to control the scope of the transactions, that is we will do through the propagation behavior. Decides whether a new transaction should be started or an existing should be used. That we can tell through this particular propagation behavior. So there are, okay, when a particular transaction will be started, okay, or a method when it will be started, there are certain times you may want, okay, new transaction should be started and there the method has to run. Or you may want, okay, the same transaction should be carried out and the method has to be executed. So depending on that, that is called your propagation behavior is all about. Now there are, okay, this propagation behavior is all we have been specified in the org.step Spring Framework transaction definition interface, which is containing this particular constant. So whenever you want to use this particular constant, we need to use this transaction definition interface and we can implement that. And what is that? Okay, it says each one. Okay, we'll see that. So we have propagation behavior, we have different type of your constants which are there. There are around 7 different type of your constants which are being provided here. We'll see that. So these are the constants like propagation mandatory, propagation required, propagation never, we have propagation not supported. All these are the different type of your propagation behavior which are being provided over here. Okay, so that is one is that propagation behavior description when I am talking about this, which will indicate that current method must run within a transaction. If no existing transaction is there, then an exception will be thrown. Please remember, these are very, very important. Propagation mandatory. These are same type of your transactions when you are implementing, even in case of your EJB also. Those who knows EJB, if you remember, these type of your propagation behaviors are also available in case of your there also. When you are implementing the transaction in case of your EJB. So there we say that this type of your behavior can be specified in a CMT. That is called your container managed transaction, which you are implementing there. So using that, we specify like mandatory, required, never, not supported. Like this it will be there, but here it has been added that propagation be a mandatory, propagation required, propagation never, propagation not supported, like this. But there it will be having single one mandatory or required or never or not supported, or we have required new. Then you have something. This is all 6 different attributes will be there, but here we have something called as 7 different attributes which are there. There also it tells about whether the transaction has to be created a new transaction or the existing transaction need to be implemented, or this new transaction need to be created for that particular method. That we need to be specified as using this particular attributes actually. So before we execute the methods and all, we need to specify this particular behaviors also. So this is what the propagation required, which says that the current method must run with a transaction. If any existing transaction is in progress, the method will run within that transaction, otherwise it will create a new transaction. So this is what you are required, we say. Never means the current method should not run with a transaction. The existing transaction, if it is in process, then exception will be thrown. Not supported, if the current method should not run with a transaction. If an existing transaction is in process, then it will suspend the duration of that particular method also. But it will not throw an exception, but it will suspend. Then we have required new. This is also an attribute which we can be specified as part of your transactional attribute. This will indicate that current method must run within own transaction. Therefore, a new transaction is started. However, if an existing transaction is there, then it will suspend again. Support says that current method does not necessarily require a transaction to run. However, existing transaction is in process, then the current method can run within that. It will run within the same transaction if it is there, or else if you want to allocate a new transaction, with that also it will run, but it is not necessary to create a new transaction. So then nested, propagation nested will say that indicate that method should run within a nested transaction. If any existing transaction is processed, then it can be committed or rolled back independently from enclosing the transaction. So this behaves like a propagation required also. So these are all the different type of your propagation behavior for a particular transaction. If you want to specify, we can specify that. And depending on the method, whether it has to run with a new transaction or whether it has to run with an existing transaction. If you want to specify, then we can give this particular behaviors also. Any questions so far? Now see, so this is all about your different type of your the behaviors which we can be specified for the transaction. The next one, it is nothing but your isolation level. As you know that, okay, these all the things are basically to avoid the concurrency type of your issues which has to be, which may occur when the transaction, okay, occurring concurrently. And the transaction can lead to the different type of problem. Can anyone tell me that, okay, what are the different type of problem it will lead when there can be a concurrent transactions? We have discussed that already. What are the different type of your issues or maybe the problems which will be arise when concurrent transactions will occur? We have seen in the Hibernate also. We have been discussed in the Hibernate that, okay, what will be that? Consistency, no. Actually, the concurrent, when we do the concurrency, these are the problems which will be arise. Thank you. Thank you, Bhavani. Garden. Shivani was done correctly, or Pavitra. Inconsistency is not the correct answer. At the same time, user trying to update or another trying to. That is Silpa, yes, okay, this is the concurrency which you are saying. But due to concurrency, there are certain problems which may occur. Due to concurrency, okay, of the transaction, there are certain problems which will be occurred that are good. Nice. Okay, so that is nothing but, okay, if you remember, okay, we are discussed about something called as dirty read, lost update problem, non-repeatable read, okay, phantom read. All these are the different type of your issues which may arise, okay, when we are going for the, okay, concurrent transaction. Okay, so that time, okay, to avoid that particular situation, we should use the different kind of your isolation levels or locks we need to be implemented for that. So what are the different type of your isolation levels which can be implemented as a part of your Spring-based transaction? You can see that. So Spring, okay, the table which will show that, okay, what are the isolation levels which we can be specified over here. That is isolation default, isolation read uncommitted, isolation read committed. Okay, so that all the few things which we can talk about as part of your, okay, Spring-based application can use these particular isolation level locks also. We have isolation repeatable read, isolation serializable. All these are the different type of your lock, okay, the isolation levels which we can be specified for that. This is all about, okay, the certain. So these are propagation behavior which is there, okay, by which we can specify that, okay, which particular transaction it has to occur, whether it has to be a new transaction or existing transaction, and depending on the type of your propagation behavior, the method will throw an exception or it will run or it will suspend its execution kind of thing. Then we have isolation levels which says that whenever there is a concurrent transaction which is going to occur, so depending on the type of your this isolation level values, okay, that your methods are going to run accordingly. Okay, so whether it has to run, whether it can avoid the dirty read problem or lost updates or non-repeatable read or phantom read problems. So these all the problems can be avoided by using the different isolation level locks which you can be specified. Then we have something called as, okay, the transaction attributes. Okay, transaction attributes, we have in this, okay, we have the third one which is nothing but your read-only transaction. In a case of your read-only transaction, okay, it will only reads and does not update the data. That is called your read-only transaction. And this will enable the database engine to optimize the database resources for a particular query. If you know that, okay, there will be no manipulations, that is updating or inserting or deleting, which is not going to happen by the user or the page, okay, then we can use this read-only transaction attribute which we can be specified, and the particular transaction will only query the database, but we cannot do any update or insert or delete kind of your operation cannot be implemented on that. Then we have something called as timeout. Transaction timeout is also one of the feature by which we can do. Transaction will run for a long period. Some of the transactions running may involve locks in the underlying data stores. These run long-running transactions, tie up with the database sources. Otherwise, so if they will be running long, then unnecessarily leading to the resource deadlocks and all. You can declare the transaction to automatically roll back after a certain period of time instead of waiting for the transaction to release the resources. That will be called as a timeout. So we can specify a particular timeout for a particular transaction. When you are implementing, depending on that, the transaction will be timed out. Once the time is been completed. So this is one type of your attributed transactional attribute which we can be specified to manage that particular transaction. Next one, it is nothing but your rollback rules. Rollback rules which will specify which exceptions can cross the transactions to the rollback. That will be called as a rollback rules, and it will help you to declare the transaction can be rolled back. Helps you to declare transaction that cannot be rolled back in the event of specific runtime exceptions and all. That will be called as a rollback rules. This is all about your certain things about your transactions which we are talking about. Now we'll see that the next, that is nothing but your implementing the transaction. These are all some of the few things about the transaction. What is the transaction is all about, and we have discussed about the different type of your properties and all, how to define the transactional attributes like propagation behaviors. We have also discussed about the different type of your isolation level locks. Then we have discussed about the read-only and transaction timeout also we have been discussed here. So now we'll move down to the next part, that is nothing but how I should implement the transaction in my program. If I want to implement it in my program, how do I implement the transactions? That we are going to discuss also. Give me a minute. All right. So let us see this. Now, what is the transaction is all about? We can go for the transactions are not the part of the primary business logic of the application. They just help in maintaining data integrity. So there is as you know that so transactions, logging, security is not the part of the primary business logic of the application. They will help in maintaining the data integrity. Of course, that time we have to be implemented this as a cross-cutting concern. As part of your AOP, if it is we have seen, we need to implement that as a cross-cutting concern that will cut across various modules of the application. They are considered as implemented as an aspect. So we can implement that as an aspect. So you can say that transactions will be the aspect in your application. So to implement the transaction, we need to select a transaction manager. That is transaction specific operations such as committing or rollbacking the transactions, which we can do about this. And the transaction manager interface will contain certain methods. So we'll see that what are the methods it will be contained here when you are implementing the transactions. The transaction manager is an important component of the transaction processing environment. It will responsible for creating the transaction when requested by the application, and this will establish the maintaining of the transaction context, okay, which will be maintaining, and also it will associate between the transaction and the resources taking part in the transactions also it will tell. This is about your transaction manager, which we can talk about. So this is what your transaction manager will do. It will create the transactions, and as and when requested by the application component, this will establish and maintain the transaction context, and this will maintain the association between the transaction and the resource taking part in the transaction that will be taking part in the transactions also. Traditional web application development uses the transaction API, that is JTA we may use. We may use the different APIs of that your transactions. We are using the different classes of the transactions of the API, and we used to write that code. So, but however, in the case of your Spring, we need not to write that particular code and all. Spring will automatically take care of that. That transaction manager which will take care about that. So that is the basic, the beauty of your Spring-based application when you are implementing. So the transaction manager will provide a set of technology that is independent methods for managing the transactions. So when you change the data access technology, you just need to change the declaration of the transaction manager in the Spring application context file. That is all about your transaction which we can talk about. Okay, so the Spring framework will abstract general set of transaction facilities, helps keep your transaction management code independent, okay, to the main business logic. It will give a platform transaction manager interface, that is general interface for all the transaction manager, and encapsulate a set of technology independent methods. And there are certain methods which are there in the platform transaction manager, okay, which is core component for managing the transactions, and having the methods like get transaction, commit, and rollback. And get transaction, this method will returns a currently active transactions, okay, creates the new one. Whereas commit, this method will commit a given transaction to the store the data, and rollback, okay, this method will rolls back, okay, given transactions also. These are all the certain things about your platform transaction manager it is concerned. Now, what are the different type of your transaction management APIs are there that we need to see? We have something like, okay, in your platform transaction manager interface, from which, okay, the different classes which can be derived. That is data source transaction manager, JTA transaction manager, Hibernate transaction manager, JPA transaction manager, and we have JDO transaction manager. These are the 5 different type of your transaction manager which we can use, okay, when you are taking part as the transaction implementation in our code, that is in your Spring-based code when you are writing. So these are the different type of your transaction APIs which you are going to use. So we'll talk about the data source transaction manager. Then if you are using this type of your data source transaction manager and accessing using JDBC, you can need the different, this particular interface we can use. If you are using a simple JDBC type of things, the code we are using for retrieving the data and all, then it is better that, okay, you can go for this type of your simple transaction manager which we can be used. JTA transaction manager, if you are using the JTA, that is managing the transaction in Java E application, like we may go for the server-based applications and all. In that case, okay, we can use JTA transaction manager can be implemented for that. Hibernate transaction manager, if you are using the Hibernate transactions, Hibernate way of accessing the data and storing the data, in that case, okay, we can use Hibernate transaction manager, and by which, okay, we can access the data also. That is also can be possible, okay, as part of your Hibernate transaction manager. JPA transaction manager, if you are using JPA, Spring with a JPA also if you are implementing instead of your Hibernate, then we can go for JPA transaction manager also we can do. Then we have JDO transaction manager if you want to provide persistent in your web application through using the Java data object, that is JDO. If you are using, in that case, okay, we can use JDO transaction manager. So depending on the type of your implementation transaction manager, we can use the different type of your classes and all. Data source transaction manager will be used whenever you are trying to implement Spring with a JDBC implementation, not with a Hibernate or not with a JPA or not with a normal interface. In that case, we can go for your data source transaction manager. We can write where you have single data source and transaction can be implemented. Now this is what we are doing this way. So platform transaction manager, which is the superclass hierarchy type. And from this data source transaction, Hibernate, JDO, JPA, then JPA. And data source means JDBC, Hibernate, JDO, if you are using JDO, they are data object which you are implementing. If you are using JPA, then JPA transaction manager which you can implement. And we have JPA, Java Transaction Manager also we can implement. So these are all the different types of your platform transaction manager interface for managing the transaction we can be implementing on that. All right. Any questions? Any questions? So let us see. If I want to implement this transaction manager, these 5 different types of your transaction manager which we have been discussed till now, if I want to implement in my case, say if I want to implement in my application, how do I implement that? So that is okay. We need to specify in the configuration file. In the bean file, we need to specify that bean ID transaction manager tx manager. org.springframework.orm.hibernate3.hibernate transaction manager. Property I can give that session factory, reference to the session factory. By this way, we can implement the Hibernate transaction manager. But it is not that we have to implement only Hibernate transaction manager. You can implement any of this transaction manager whichever you require. But however, I have just discussed that Hibernate transaction manager how to use that we have been discussed here. This kind of things which we can be implemented as part of your transaction manager is all about. Alright, have you understood now how to configure a transaction manager? Any questions? We are writing now application context.xml file. In that only we need to write this transaction manager code. That is the bean ID we need to specify, Hibernate transaction, and there you need to give the session factory. And this session factory which is going to be connected with your DO object. All right. Now this is about your Hibernate transaction. Similarly, if I want to implement your say data source, we can also implement the data source manager, driver manager. That is also we can do, and by which also we can implement. That is also can be possible. And we have this is the way how you can create a sample implementation about your transaction, which we can talk about how to configure. Now we'll see that if you want to configure the transaction, either you can configure by using the element or by using the annotation which we can be specified the transactions also. Now let us will see that how we can use the transaction elements or how we can use the annotation. By using that we can be specified. Let us will see that. So when you are configuring the element, transaction management is a kind of your cross-cutting concerns. So you should manage transaction declaratively by using AOP approach. So how we are implementing AOP, similarly we need to specify that. So you have, there are 2 namespaces, either AOP namespace or TX is the namespace, by which we can configure the your transactions. So you can see that this is configuring the transactions, that is the TX or AOP, and we have this TX namespace is containing like advice, attributes and methods are there. Where you want to implement the transaction, you can be specified that. So Tx colon advice, okay, which is nothing but, okay, is used to create an advice called the transaction manager, and each transaction advice requires an identifier of the transaction manager. And Tx colon attributes, okay, which is used to set the transaction attributes. Tx colon method, which is used to define a transaction attributes. Alright, so that's a few things about your transaction, what we can be implemented, how we are implementing the transaction. And there are different type of your transaction attributes to define the transaction policies also, like name, propagation, isolation level, timeout, read only, rollback, no rollback for. These are the different type of your attributes which we can be specified in a case of your transaction methods also. So let us see that. So we have seen that till now that transaction advice, transaction attributes, and we have transaction method. And in the method we can give these all the different kind of your attributes. In the transaction method, either I can give the value like name or propagation or isolation, timeout, read only, rollback, all this. Now you can see that, okay, if you want to go for transaction advice, how you can specify. Transaction advice, okay, transaction manager is TX manager. But remember that, okay, again the TX manager, it should be already defined in our, okay, the configuration file should already contain this transaction management declaration. That is what type of transaction, whether it is a JPA type of JPA, or whether it is a Hibernate type or JDO type, or okay, data source type. What kind of transaction manager we are using, so already it should be defined. Then only this particular tag will work, like tx.attributes, tx.method name, method and name of that method, and propagation you can be specified to that. Alright. Any questions? Now we have. So now we have already created the transactions, okay, implementation and all. Now we can associate the transaction advice with a point cut also. That we can implement through the tags, that is AOP tags, which we can implement. Transaction manager is the name of the transaction which we have already specified in our bean. Bean ID is equal to TX manager. Then we have specified the class, that is which kind of your transaction. So that name we need to give it here. Then we need to specify the AOP config, that is point cut, the payment services, the advisor which we need to be specified, that is your configuration. We need to be created, we need to be linked with your advice. Okay, cannot be linked with a point cut directly, you have to declare an advisor. So you need to create a point cut and you need to specify the advisor by which we can specify your transactions, okay, AOP based transaction point cut also. And once we have been specified, then we can call that particular transaction. If you want to be implemented, then we can go for that. Application context, then you can say payment services context.getBean transaction. Then you can call the book ticket method, and by using that book ticket method, you will see that, okay, the transaction will be gets called here. Like this, we have created a simple one, that is nothing but your sample transactions also in the AOP, how we have implemented. The same way it is going to be executed also. This is as a part of your configuration, as part of your XML based configuration also we have seen, but annotation wise also we can use. Okay, that is not that, okay, in that transaction only it will be implemented with your configuration of your XML file. If you want to implement with the annotation, we can specify the annotation also. How do I implement that annotation? So let us see. We can use the configure the transaction using annotation also. So how do I implement that? Spring uses the following element to support the annotation driven transaction management. like okay, the at transaction element of the org.spring framework.transaction.annotational class which we are using, by which okay we can implement the transactions also. That is also we can talk about. So px colon annotation driven element has a transaction manager attribute. So this is what we can implement over here. The attribute specified the reference to an existing platform transaction manager bean that will be called as implement the transactions. So this is what we can be specified okay when you are using okay the annotations. If you want to implement, then we can go for this type of a transaction element which we need to be given, and then we have to specify the platform transaction manager and which particular transaction manager we want to use. You can specify that. And in the transactional annotation, we can also specify these attributes like propagation, isolation, we have timeout, read only, then we have no rollback and rollback for. These are the different type of your attributes which we can be specified, and we can specify that values also. Propagation, as you know that okay, propagation you have like supported and not supported, then we have required new, all that we can be specified the values. Isolation we can specify also, read committed, okay, that is isolation underscore read committed, all these okay, the serialization that we can take in the isolation level. Timeout we can specify that okay, the period of time in integer value. Read only we can specify whether it has to be true or false. No rollback or rollback will be specified the list of exceptions for which the transaction will be rolled back. Rollback for, it is nothing but your list of exceptions for which the transaction will roll back. For which exception it should not roll back, which exception it has to be rolled back, that you can also be specified. With the annotation, if you want to specify, we can give that. And transactional annotation, the propagation setting, propagation required by default, isolation is default, transaction is read write, transaction timeout is a default timeout underlying the transaction system will be supported. Any runtime exception will trigger the rollback, and any checked exception will not okay, roll back. This is a default setting, and if you want to set that transactional, this is the way how you can give. If you have remembered that okay, we have written that okay, DO object which we have created, there we can specify that okay, transactional propagation is equal to propagation.required, read only is equal to false. That's it. Before the method, you need to write this particular transactional code and we can implement. Then when you are implementing, even in our AOP also, if you want to implement, we can specify that also. That's the way you can create a sample transaction and you can implement also. If you want to give that the same way in the case of your implementation in XML configuration, that is also can be possible. So there are two ways. Either you implement through the annotation, or you can implement through the okay, XML based configurations also, which we can do. That are the few things about the transaction. See, transactional, though it is looking like okay, a lot of theoretical aspects which are there, but implementation is very easy. We have to use simple annotation. If you are using, this is the way just we have to implement the transaction. Transactional propagation.required, read only is equal to false, timeout how much, or maybe whatever the 5 isolation level locks we can be specified. With a simple annotational feature also we can give, and we can write that. That's the simple way you can implement. So this is the coding and all what you need to do. So you need to specify. So the transactional code is like this. Okay. Then only thing that okay, you need to know that okay, what I need to specify, whether for this method, whether this has to be new transaction or within the same transaction it has to run, and you need to know that okay, whether it has to be a read-only transaction or a write. so that you can be specified. All these are the different type of your concept. If you know, then easily you can specify the transaction system. So transaction annotation driven manager, you can be specified with that. So this is a sample code which has been implemented, the transactional element. You can see transaction manager, my session factory, and configuration we can give transaction manager, which is nothing but your Hibernate transaction manager we can give, and session factory which we can be specified. This is the way also we can implement a sample transaction. If you want to implement through the configurational basis, also we can specify the transactions also. That are the two different ways what we have been discussed about the transactions. So this is all about few things about the transactions what we are talking about. This is about your chapter 6, which is managing the transactions implementation we do. So if you want to implement as a coding wise, if you want to implement simple coding, through the annotation is the best way to implement the transaction itself, instead of implementing the XML based configuration, because it will be easier for implementing the the transaction with the annotation basis only. Give me a moment. Let us see in your book, in your theorem, we have, you can see that, that solution files and all also, you can check also that particular files. We have, for all, each chapter also, we have been provided the solutions, in your faculty theorem. I will just upload this particular faculty files and all in the group, you can just go through that also. Files which I have given, what we have discussed, that is nothing but a sample demos, simple demos, which we can execute because it will be easier to implement. But we have also certain projects which is already been given in the theorem, which we can go through also. This is one program which has been given, new tech bookstore. This is a project which has been provided to you. So this particular project, which will be, this is the project which has been provided by the theorem. In theorem we have been provided that. You can see that, new book, tech store, bookstore which has been provided to you. Here you have, these are the different type of your DAO class and all which has been. This is a one sample project which has been given over this. Book XDM, that is your Hibernate mapping file. A simple book class, which has been given here, you can see. And there is a DAO, which has been specified here. Maybe this is error it is coming because Hibernate is not being added maybe properly. That is why we are getting an error. But this is way how you can implement. We can create a DO object. We can create a configuration object, session, a factory criteria, that is book class, add, restriction we can give, and we can get the book, list of books also we can get. By using the configuration only as implemented. In the DO class only we need to write the code. And you can see that same like that. Okay, check login, customer hbm.xml file, order hbm.xml file. These are all the hbm.xml file. As you know that okay, it is a mapping file between them. And coming back okay to the default package, which is containing checkbook details.java file, check login, order detail bean, register user, and Hibernate config and Hibernate. Okay, another file of Hibernate which is there. First, this is my checkbook details. Now we have one more, okay, that is nothing but your web pages, which we can see. These are the JSF pages where what we can access here. In your application context, what it has written, you can see the checkbook detail, check login, order detail bean, register are the components which are there. In your dispatcher servlet.xml, you have URL mapping, same, it is not given anything. In the faces-config.xml, we have certain rules which are navigational rules which has been specified. That will not be a problem. But okay, here you can see that okay, there are certain resources and all he has given, images which are provided, and you can go to the redirect.jsp page. You will go to the index.html page where we have created a sample code. Okay, this is which will display the values. So we have created this, okay, base template.xhtml. In the base template.xhtml, we have created a format, okay, check user ID, login control we have created. All this is as a project which has been provided to you. Okay, this is a total project which has been given to you to implement okay, your code. Okay, so you can please go through this particular project. Okay, there are two projects which will be given. One is that okay, we have new tech bookstore which is there, and one more you'll see that okay, one more project also which will be there in for the student to learn. That is nothing but one more as an activity. When you go through, this is my chapter 6, which will go to activity. You have solution to the Grant University. So there are two things are there. One is Grant University. One is you have okay, the new tech bookstore. Okay, these are the two things which are there. So both are okay, kind of your project which we can implement, and you can just go through that. First, you see our demo because okay, that are the very simple, okay, simplified demos which I have created without having a, because these type of your demos, okay, it will show directly, then okay, it will be a confusing one. So hence, okay, we'll see the few demos which we have done, okay, very simple demos, and then gradually you can come back to this particular demos also. Yes, definitely I will share this particular demos with this Spring demos, okay, Hibernate and all. Okay, I will be, actually this will come with your theorem. Do this because it is 227 MB. Part by part, otherwise we will see. This is data files for students also there, like that. Okay, Spring, we have exercises, okay, which need to be okay, done by them. Okay, so please see to this. So these projects, okay, which we need to be defined, okay, and you can implement. So as I've shown you, that is the demos I will upload, okay, for the that is Hibernate with integrating your Spring. I will share that. And okay, one more which I have not done, okay, with a web integration. Okay, so I am trying to do a small demo because I can show with a simple project, but with the project, okay, instead of writing that, okay, a simple demo if we can create, okay, that we are going to see. Because as far as demo, if it is concerned, we can go for this project where we have implemented JSF pages as well as okay, your Hibernate. Both it has been implemented. But however, I want to show a sample demo where 2-3 pages only will be there which can be executed. Okay, that I'll see that, okay, I can share with you all. Okay, so that is the third chapter demo which we are talking about. Okay, fine. So that I will share with you all also. Okay, so once with a simple one, and you please go through this all the projects once. Okay, so that, okay, you can get to know how we can do the JSF projects and all. So first you do our demos which we have been discussed, and then we can slowly move to this also. Unmute your mic. What is your name? Sorry for that. From Rosary Garden. Every time it is stuck. Can you please ask your TIF from Rosary Garden, because when I'm trying to take you on air, it is. See, better if you want to really, we want to go for this, because some of the few things which I can say, okay, you can go to the, one is everybody knows, okay, the website. Which has been given, but okay, in that, okay, we cannot see this type of your integration level codes which has not been given, but basic level codes also we can get it over that. Okay, that is what he has given, and we can have www.java Java T point. This is better for Hibernate. Okay, if you want to go for this, okay, and this is better for your JSF also. Okay, so JSF purpose tutorial point is better. What I have feel. Okay, then JavaTPoint.com, which is the better one for the Hibernate based. Okay, so he has given a lot of examples. Okay, as part of the Hibernate based one. Okay, you can take that. Okay, that is the better one I can say. Yes, this is what I can say about your try for the reference things and all. All right. Spring also we have tutorial point is also good. Okay, you can also use that. This is what I can give you the some of the sites. Okay, basically, okay, where we go through that. Okay, generally we have, and see that a lot of YouTube videos also you can see for more on that. Okay, so you have different series of videos are there. You can go through that particular video for Spring and all. Okay, so that, okay, you can get to know something now. All right, so we'll go for a break, lunch break we can go for, and we'll come back and we'll be discussing about how, okay, we can like how we can go for other TRIM components and all we are going to see. And we are going to see about something about the FACT based questions, mostly from where, and we are going to discuss about, okay, the few feedbacks and all. Okay, so that's a few things I want to do, and think about, okay, any, okay, extra information, okay, whichever you can share with us, okay, so that everyone can be benefited out of it also. If anyone have any of the sites they know, okay, that is a better one they have seen, okay, as part for JSF, Hibernate and Spring, you can share with me, so that, okay, or you can share in the group. That will be helpful for us, okay, so others can also be benefited out of it also. All right, fine. So we'll come back after the lunch. So I'll not take much time after the lunch. Okay, we'll have just, okay, few minutes, one maximum of half an hour to 1 hour we'll spend, and we'll just know that, okay, how the FACT based questions which are there, where you have to stress of them. Okay, so that, okay, we can know how to, right. Okay, and we'll talk about what are the other references and all we can move, okay, in the this Spring and all. Okay, how we can learn more on that. Okay, so like we can have a break of lunch break and we'll come back. Thank you then.